I am the founder and executive director of an organization called the Youth Sexpert Program. We are a nonprofit, and every year we offer semesters worth of comprehensive sex education as well as communications training, specifically for high school age students. And the idea there is that they can take that information and become their own community sexual health expert. So we're a bit like a training program. We work with a lot of incredible sex educators, some of whom are here today, some of our incredible board members. And we're really excited to present this event about what the talk looks like in the digital age, and all the nuances that exist there. And so, yeah, just a little bit more about what drove us to create this event. We work with individual families as opposed to working through schools. And in that process have learned a lot about what sex education looks like in a lot of different households, for a lot of our students and for a lot of the parents that we work with. And that has been extremely eye-opening. And we want to provide more resources and also to help make our program and just conversations about sex more approachable for parents generally. So I'm going to give brief introductions for all of our panelists, and then we are going to jump right into some questions. And we will have a 30-minute Q&A at the end. In terms of the Q&A, we ask that you are more than welcome to submit questions all throughout the entire panel. We ask that people submit their questions in the sort of text version. You should have like a Q&A option on the bottom of your screen. And that is how we will choose which questions we ask or we answer. We might not be able to get to everybody's questions because we do have a limited amount of time, but hopefully there are lots of resources and things that people can access after the event. I also briefly want to thank our event partners who are Amaze and Advocates for Youth, SIECUS, and Healthy Teen Network. So our panelists. Melissa Pintor Carnegie is a renowned sexuality educator, best-selling author, and leading national voice for sex-positive education for youth and families. Her work with sex-positive families has been featured in Huffington Post, Parents Magazine, CNN, New York Times, BuzzFeed, and has reached thousands of families around the world via engaged social media following and monthly live workshops. They are the author of Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids. Dr. Lex Brown James is a premier sexologist and AASECT certified sexuality educator and supervisor who provides education and therapy from womb to tomb through her practice, the Institute for Sexuality and Intimacy, LLC, keynotes, panels, and curriculum design. Amongst other books and peer-reviewed articles, Dr. Lex has written, These Are My Eyes, This Is My Nose, This Is My Vulva, These Are My Toes, and Nani Talks About Consent. Rachel Lotus is a Brooklyn-based sex educator and founder of The Talk NYC, which is a collective of educators who offer sex ed resources for youth, parents, and classrooms. Before founding The Talk, Rachel taught middle and high school in the New York City public school system, where she witnessed firsthand the urgent need for better sex education. She is also the parent of 3 children. Mariah is a sex educator and digital learning designer. Beyond traditional education settings, Mariah's goal is to make sex education more accessible through social media. Her social media presence as the Sex Ed Files allows her to share inclusive and medically accurate, as well as pleasure-centered sexual health information and make complex topics relatable and informed by youth. Based in Hartford, Connecticut, Kim Adamski is a sex educator providing programming in her community and facilitating queer social spaces. She has worked with a variety of populations, including the LGBTQ+ community, college students, youth, and even state prison inmates. Kim has had a 10-year career in sexual health education. So welcome to all of our panelists, and thank you so much for being here. This is so incredible. I'm so excited for this conversation. So I'm going to start with you, Melissa. And my first question is, when do you feel that sex education should start at home? And how should these conversations evolve as children grow?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Tara. Thank you all. This is such an honor to be here and share this space with such brilliance and really great questions. So I always say, whatever age your child is right now is the right time. There's no set age to start the talks that build a foundation of sexual health. And this includes body literacy, consent, healthy relationships, understanding identities, puberty, sex. There's a vast umbrella under sexual health. And so it offers many opportunities over time to have talks, teachable moments. And that's great news because there's not that pressure that you have to say everything in one awkward conversation that some of us may have grown up experiencing as our sex ed, or many of us experienced nothing and silence. And so it can sometimes feel intimidating to be in the position to have these conversations with a next generation if you didn't have it modeled for you. And so a few tangible examples at different stages. And again, these are just a few of so many. And the book that I wrote, Sex Positive Talks to Have with Kids, is a great guide that takes you from birth through the teen years to show you conversation starters and really drives home the point that it starts at every age and it can continue. And so, for example, if you have an infant right now, it's a great time. You can narrate diaper changes, saying things like, it's time to change your diaper. I'm going to wipe your vulva. I'm going to wipe your penis. I'm going to wipe your anus. Using correct, accurate terms for bodies helps that build that foundation for body literacy. Also paying attention to their cues, their signals that they may give you, verbal or nonverbal. Also having conversations, sometimes crucial conversations with other adults, caregivers in their lives, helping build that foundation of a consent conscious home around safe and unsafe touch. If you have a toddler or elementary age kid, teaching them, again, continuing with teaching them the actual names for their body parts so that they can speak confidently about their bodies, especially their genitals. This builds that body literacy and also introducing concepts around safe and unsafe touch. So I say this is a great time to incorporate in your reading time that you may be doing with all kinds of other storybooks and everything. Make sure you have some sex ed, sex positive books. So books that cover topics around consent, around bodies, safe and unsafe touch, families, gender, where babies come from. These are all foundational conversations, and there's so many great resources that are age relevant for the younger years. If you visit our website at sexpositivefamilies.com, we have a browsable directory where you can search by age, by type of resource, and you can find great options. Dr. Lex has a wonderful book. These are my eyes, these are my own nose, this is my vulva, these are my toes. So yeah, great books that are out that help families have these conversations early and ongoing. And then if you have a tween, puberty, right? This is a wonderful time to help them have a shame-free understanding of the natural things that bodies are designed to do, and not just their body and type of bodies or in their gender experiences that they may have with puberty, but also others, their peers. They're watching bodies change around them. They likely have questions. So how safe are we making the home for their questions to land, and so that they know that their experiences are typical or normal or age relevant. Also, this is the time where media definitely has an influence, so you can use media for teachable moments about the array of topics. If they've got devices, if you're giving them cell phones or other devices, then make sure that you've got some parental control set up, that that's a collaborative process that you're doing with them, that you're helping them understand digital literacy, that you're helping them understand the things that they might come across with these devices. And even if you're not giving your child devices, best believe that the child that they're sitting next to on the bus or in the classroom or that they visit at their friend's house or their cousin's house, we got to have these conversations. Our kids have access to things that we didn't have at our fingertips. So it's in our best interest to not avoid these conversations. So you want to talk about sexualized content. You want to talk about porn, help them feel clear about the steps to take when they come across this content. And then as move into the teen years, you can talk about navigating relationships, sexual decision making, sexual consent. For this age, it's really important that we listen. There's so much that they know that they can teach us, about many of these things. And so creating that relationship that can stay positive and open, shame-free, so that they feel safe to talk to us as they're transitioning into greater autonomy. So there are so many opportunities to support a young person's sex education at home. As parents and caregivers, we are primary influencers, right? They may have sex ed programming at school, but we're the ones that are with them longer and long term and can have more of an influence. So don't discount your influence. And the last thing I want to say on this, even if you're not a parent, it's a great time to reflect on your values around sexual health topics and sex ed. What beliefs did you grow up around? How did they influence your understanding of bodies, identities, relationships, sex? What do you envision for the future of how you might raise a child within these concepts? And what learning and healing or conversations can you have now that can help you feel prepared for that future?
Amazing. I love everything you had to say, especially about these conversations being an opportunity for both learning and teaching. That completely resonates with me. I feel like every time I talk to some of our students, I don't know, it's a changing world, and there are things that they are interested in and they are talking about that I never could have guessed. I also feel like everything you said was so encouraging as far as I'm sure that there are parents who feel as if they are too late to the conversation. And on the flip side, I'm sure that there are parents who have very young children who are feeling like they don't know what exactly the conversations they're supposed to be having for that specific age group and what is age appropriate. Which is something that we're going to get to in a little bit. But first, I would like to ask Dr. Lex, what are some effective ways to discuss specifically topics like anatomy and boundaries with those very young children, and why is that so important?
Oh, absolutely. So one, I want to say this actually starts typically before you have kids, as Melissa pointed out. So I do have worksheets on my website. So it's Lex, Lex, sex doc.com that says, what are the values that you have? What are the messages that you have? It's a free worksheet. You can download it and work through it for that conversation because it's never too late to reevaluate where you're coming from. I am also a parent. I have 4 children, so a 2-year-old all the way up to 30. I got a bonus daughter who's amazing, and my bonus daughter still needs sex ed too. So early on, Melissa gave us the whole diaper change. I will tell you, my kids are trolls. They're gems and beloved. They're also trolls. And my lover says that we can't go a day in our house without saying vulva. So vulva was in the first 5 words of all of the children that I raised, including the one that has a penis. He'd be like, I have vulva. And I'm like, no, you have a penis. All right. So that started with diaper changes and bath time. So we'd say, okay, let's wash your anus, let's wash your vulva, let's wash your nipples. Right. And so talking about these body parts, the key part here is that these parts aren't dirty or bad. When we say you have a nose, you have a nose. When we say you have eyebrows, you have eyebrows. When you have a penis, you have a penis. When you have toes, you have toes. And so I really have been dedicated to educating folks of not carrying shame around these parts, of not carrying that they're dirty or not touchable, they're bad, because what we find out is people can weaponize that against children. You will have a hard time trying to weaponize anything against my trolls. They'll be like, no, that's my vulva and you can't see that. No, you can't touch that. And I'm gonna tell my mom that you was talking about vulvas, right? And that's exactly what I've asked them to do. And I'll tell you why this is so important around some of those boundaries. Because in my house, and my kids, we say butt. So it's just butt, whatever. You can't touch my butt. Please put your butt away. Don't put your butt on the table. Like whatever it is, right? And one day they came home and was like, oh no, I got a shot in my tushy. Now, internally, I said, what the hell? Externally, my eyebrows went up and I said, tushy? Where did you learn that word? That's a funny word. What does it mean? And they told me, Mom, that's another word for butt. I don't use tushy. My partner doesn't use tushy. So this means somebody has been talking about this area around them and using a different word than we use. So that clued me in, yellow flag. Who been talking to my child about what parts, right? Turns out it was some type of Ninja Kids, Fun Family, something on YouTube Kids, where the kid was acting like a surgeon and had to give a fake shot in the tushy, and they used the term tushy. So now I can trace back where they're learning new terminology. This is also super important for young children because they're able to identify. My, at the time, 3-year-old was able to tell me that her vulva hurt. Now, she didn't know urethra. She doesn't know clitoris yet. She was 3. She knows she has a vulva, right? She knows she has a vagina. But it turns out she had a UTI. And she was able to tell me that there was pain there and she needed some help. So starting as early as possible. And once they get that, if you have a child who's intersex, if you have a child who might have gender identity or even gender dysphoria, you can start to shift those words because now you know that they know what those words are, they know what those body parts are, and they know the functioning of those body parts. So if anything starts to not function correctly, they can tell you, like, I know we talk about my front bits are hurting, or my back bits are hurting. Maybe I didn't eat enough roughage, right? And so we teach kids this terminology and then they can transform it and play with it however they want. But those boundaries are super important. My children have been taught to say no. I don't want you to kiss me. No, I don't want you to hug me. We do not say no around safety issues. You not getting in your car seat is not an option. I need you to be safe. So I'm going to place you in your car seat, even if it is against your will, right? You not wanting to wash your butt when you smell like olive outside is not an option. This is not very safe for our household. It's not very pleasant. It's not hygienic. You gotta wash, right? You can do it. I can do it, but we gotta wash. But as far as affection, as far as if they want to be held or picked up or put down, they have a right to that bodily autonomy because it's within a frame. And if your children practice saying no to you, they will definitely say no to that other child because everybody thinks it's a big boogeyman that's out to hurt children. It's mostly people that we know in some way, shape, or form, and it can be other children. And people forget that it can be other children. So they can say, no, I don't want this child doing this. And they're more likely to say no to an adult that they don't trust or that they're not close to because they can say no to mom, dad, grandma, and whoever else in our community because that's a part of the boundaries. I had to teach my 70, she claims to be a certain age because she likes to take her shoes. She doesn't want to take her shoes off at the airport anymore. And I'm like, we're just going to get you pre-checks. You don't have to take your shoes off, but you have to be 75 or older. So I think she's like 77 now. And she would pout at first when the kids didn't want to give her hugs. I'm like, we're stopping to do that. We don't do that. That violates their boundaries. It's coercive. And she was like, oh. And so my 78-year-old grandmother was able to learn. So that means people in your community, if they're willing and want to engage, they'll be able to learn. So diaper changes, bath time, bathing suit time, when you're sitting at the table, right? Or, hey, we don't have our nipples out at the table. It's not appropriate at restaurants. We don't touch our vulvas at the table. Normalizing that language helps people feel safer, and then they can utilize and access it, not only for reporting that something is wrong, but also so they don't feel shame when somebody tries to manipulate them around those body parts.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to sort of open a question to build on something that you were talking about, and anyone is more than welcome to chime in, but I'm wondering how parents might best be able to evaluate what are these areas in which I might be asking a child to do something because that's something that I want to do, and maybe these are areas where I really could be honing in on encouraging boundary work, and what are areas in which, okay, this is about safety, this is about what is maybe legal, that I really just need to sort of take things into my own hands and be the authority.
I mean, I just want to hop in and just echo. I think Lex, said it well. It says those points of care, brushing your teeth, taking care of your body, making sure that, you are, it's also giving them an understanding of their place in the world, in the bigger society and culturally. And that also can look different cross-culturally as well. And so just helping them understand social norms. And yeah, I think Lex, you covered it really well. And I love Lex. Lex is such a great storyteller. Oh.
Very, very true. Yeah. The trolls and all of the incredible people you've brought to this conversation. Amazing. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. A big portion of this event is about the digital aspect of what these conversations with young people should look like. So thinking about young people of all ages, I wanted to ask Rachel, what do you think the risks are associated with young people accessing digital sexual content? And how can parents balance privacy and respecting those boundaries, as we were just talking about, as well as safety?
Such a good question. I'm going to take it in two pieces, if that's okay. Melissa, you said it already, which is that our kids are growing up in such a different time than we did, and they're contending with all of these things that we just simply didn't have to face. And for that reason, our work as parents and caregivers and primary, influencers about sex and sexuality, we have a lot we need to talk about that maybe our own parents did not. So let me start with this. I'll just say, first and foremost, what I hear from kids all the time, even young kids, even kids who are, in early elementary school, like 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, is that if they have seen any kind of sexually explicit content, it's almost always accidental. So much of that first exposure to whether it's like mainstream porn or something related, sexually explicit, it's because kids are naturally and normally and beautifully curious. They have a million questions, and frankly, they don't get a lot of good, accurate, honest answers. And so in the sort of absence of high quality and comprehensive sex education, which I don't have to tell any of you because you already know, they will find answers where they can. And in the age of a quick Google search, it's just so easy and it's so accessible and it's free and it's ubiquitous. So it's really, really easy for young kids to stumble upon some very hardcore porn and explicit content. And when that happens, as parents, we don't always know. Why don't we always know right away? Because kids have already internalized all those messages of shame and secrecy and hiding. And they feel like, even without anyone saying directly to them that something is wrong with that kind of content, they know that if it has anything to do with naked bodies and it has anything to do with sex, if they've already learned that word and they have some sense of what it is, it must be bad and wrong and taboo. And so they often hide it. And we don't always know unless, sometimes parents and caregivers discover that their kids have seen something. Sometimes often kids show each other because, of course, it's a totally natural impulse if you see something crazy to want to show it to somebody else right away. And by middle school, kids are often showing it to each other for different reasons. Like it's a little bit of social capital. It's a little bit of, can you believe this? It's a little bit of, everybody's talking about sex all the time. But what's so kind of, I think, a little bit of a wake-up call that, and I say this as a parent myself, is just to get real with the statistics on porn and how early kids are actually seeing it. And I think and I, again, totally include myself in this kind of mindset of like, not my kid, everybody else's kid, but definitely not mine, but probably, yes, your kid too. The average age for kids to see porn for the first time is around 12. And that corresponds, unfortunately, with the exact age that for many kids, puberty is also happening. And that is when brains are the most malleable and also the most vulnerable, right, to all kinds of influences. So it's what makes learning a new language so easy for kids of that age, and learning a new skill of any kind. It's also what makes that kind of content more impactful and in some cases risky, right? So you asked about the risks. So I'll kind of hit the bullet points of what the research says and what I anecdotally have seen to be like the kind of primary risks with that kind of content for younger kids. So first, arousal shapes desire, meaning like the kinds of associations that young people are making by having exposure to that kind of content will go on to inform the kinds of desires that they will have later, most of the time, right? A lot of, and when I'm talking about porn, when I'm using the word porn, just to clarify, I'm talking about mainstream free porn, right? So there is ethical porn out there, but that's not the kind of porn that most kids are able to access because most of it is behind a paywall and they also just don't know where to find it. So most of the porn is stuff like Pornhub. And there is a tremendous amount of aggressive, violent porn. And it doesn't show consent and it doesn't show conversation. It doesn't show a diversity of body type or size or color. There is so much focus on male pleasure. And so we're also not seeing like, a diverse representation of reciprocity between people or the balance of pleasure between people. There's certainly no like healthy relationship modeling going on. And there's also been, and I think there's a question that we'll touch on this later, so I won't go into it too much, but there's also been a norming of rough sex, right? So because that's kind of the trickle down effect of the way things work. So I hear from teens often these days about the kinds of sexual acts they're trying out with partners, but they're often trying those acts out not because they have spontaneously thought of it and thought, "Ooh, that sounds interesting and fun, and maybe I want to play in that way," but more, I've seen it, or I think my partner wants this, or I think I should do this to please my partner. And, while if you are an adult with a lot of like communication skills and experience and really wonderful boundary setting, you can play in those ways that are a little more risky. When you are just starting out as a sexual being and having some of your first experiences, it's trickier, right? So, and I forgot kind of a major thing, which is another risk is the potential for addictive behaviors and for real life sexual experiences and relationships to feel less satisfying because the kinds of stimuli that you will encounter in mainstream porn are so extreme and so exaggerated, it's very hard to replicate that in real life. So there's trouble with arousal and trouble with stimulation and just needing kind of more and more. Second part of the question, which is I think the tougher part, Tara, but I love that you threw it at me, which is how do you balance privacy and safety, right? And I think it's a different conversation depending on the ages of the kids, right? So like as parents, when our kids are younger, we have a certain sort of director of operations role where we're very involved in a lot of things. If we were to replace porn with something like drugs and alcohol, it would actually be a pretty simple calculation. We, as parents of younger kids, would say drugs and alcohol are not for kids. They would be super unsafe for you to consume at this age. We're going to, as Melissa said, collaborate in the setting of boundaries and rules around this. We're going to do everything possible to delay your exposure to those things because we love you, we care about you, it's about your health and safety, not because those things are terrible and bad forever, but simply because they're not appropriate for kids. So you make it very clear, you're very transparent, and that can look specifically like, we don't use screens in bedrooms of any kind, screens in common places. So we know what you're doing and with whom, and it's very, open and transparent up to a certain age. I think, for younger kids, it's appropriate to know passwords or not even to have them so that parents also have access to devices to just check in, to have many, many, many conversations about online safety and what that looks like, and to do some role plays and talk about things that would, be a yellow flag or a red flag or something to come and talk to you about right away, those kinds of things. And of course, talking openly with our kids about what porn is, because many young people actually don't know that porn is actors, that those people are not always demonstrating a real response to what is happening, that those people are not always compensated fairly or treated fairly, that that's not what bodies look like in real life a lot of the time, all of those things. So when kids are very young, it's it's a kind of a simpler, shorter conversation. Like, if you ever see something online that looks like it's made for grown-ups, that might involve grown-ups' bodies doing grown-up things, that's something you would just come and tell me about. And also emphasizing, most importantly, you would never be in trouble. It is not something I would ever be mad at you for. And there's nothing wrong with, and as your kids get older, then the conversation becomes, it is totally normal to be curious about bodies and sex and how it works and how people do it. That is totally okay. In fact, your curiosity is awesome. And I want to help you find answers to all of your questions in really safe and age-appropriate places. So if you're curious, you can come to me with your questions. We can find some cool things for you to look at on your own, or for both of us to look at together. There are some places where it isn't safe to learn about sex. There's something called porn, and then you can actually explain what it is and also what it isn't. As our kids get older and they enter the teen years, it becomes a different conversation because they need more privacy. They deserve more privacy, and our role becomes more like consultant, if we're lucky. Like, they can tolerate any kind of guidance from us. But at that point, we hope that we have infused them with our values, with our belief systems, with enough information and decision-making skills and social emotional skills that they can kind of go forth and make their own decisions. So we can still talk about porn and talk about why we would be concerned if they were consuming a whole lot of it. And we can still offer alternatives to porn and say there are so many other awesome resources that aren't babyish, that are not dumbed down, that are intended for a teen audience, that you can explore and use. And I'm here as a resource too. And you may think it's weird and gross to talk to your parent about sex, but I'm down if you are, and I'll do my best. And if I don't know an answer, I'll come back to you. And really just kind of hoping that they can make, safe and healthy decisions. And all porn isn't bad, and all porn use in life isn't bad. And I hate to even use the word bad, but there are real concerns. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel like there is so much to digest in what you just said, from, yes, the very real risks associated with the widespread availability of online mainstream pornography, but also, being realistic about the statistics as far as how young people are when they're accessing this content, and having that inform the conversations that we're having in our homes. And I think a big piece of it that you really honed in on was being honest about what porn is and being real and truthful, because I see these conversations happening about online safety broadly. And I think maybe that they're talking about porn without talking about porn, and
Right.
that can also do such a disservice. So thinking through another aspect of what digital media looks like and how digital media can impact people's understanding of sexuality, young people's understanding of sexuality. Mariah, I was wondering if you could speak to, especially as somebody who uses social media on the educational side of things, how you feel social media impacts specifically teenagers' understandings of sexuality, and what do social media platforms look like in terms of both education and misinformation?
I love this question. I'm definitely going to start with the positive aspects of social media. And I think right now, especially with sexual health, social media has become like a lifeline for so many people in terms of accessing education and also building community they may not have offline. In fact, I think this has been true throughout the internet historically. I think back to like my use of Tumblr and connecting with people that I didn't feel safe connecting with on the outside world. So I see that still happening today. I think social media allows silenced voices to be heard, and it can be a source of that digestible, accessible, and relatable sexual health information that reflects like what youth are experiencing. Plus, I mean, like I said, it's a lifeline for many, but a lot of youth already spend a significant time online on social media, on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, and there's an opportunity there for sex educators and other professionals to meet learners where they're already engaged. So there's that aspect of like, it's accessible, people are already there, it's relatable. But also I think social media can extend the reach of traditional sex education programs by making resources available to individuals, again, who may not have access to good sex ed in like a formal classroom setting. And it supports lifelong learning outside the classroom, because as many of us know, sex ed doesn't end when your week-long or 2-day health unit ends. Sex ed is forever. And that's why I love this particular panel, because it involves caregivers and parents, people who are a part of this journey, the sex ed journey. And yeah, so I love that aspect. I think traditional sex ed methods, like, and what I mean by that is like school-based sex ed, that like, you know, the typical health unit meeting the state sex ed standards or policies. I think they are a valuable starting point for like foundational knowledge, introducing some basic terminology, all that great stuff. I mean, I think it's, I do that as my job, so I do think it's valuable. But there are limitations, and social media can fill in a lot of those gaps, in my opinion. It can fill in the lack of inclusivity. It can fill in the lack of communication on the end of the learner, because in traditional sex ed or any other like school-based educational program, there's a lot of one-way communication where it's a lecture, it's a presentation, and this inhibits active participation from learners. They don't always feel like they have a say in what they're learning and doing, but online, you know, they can engage communication through comments, likes, shares, direct messaging. There's a lot more of an opportunity for their voice to be heard in that aspect. Also, traditional sex ed is limited to these state-approved topics and standards, which, you know, the guidelines can be helpful in some sense, and it does give us a nice understanding of what's like age appropriate and all that great stuff. But social media can create a space for learning more of those taboo and very important topics, and provide a more like anonymous, non-judgmental environment. I think that like privacy aspect of being able to pick up your phone and learn what you want to learn in your own space can feel very safe in comparison to being in a classroom with 50 high schoolers trying to, you know, hear the sex educator talk about penises. There's an aspect of safety. So I know I'm talking about a lot of different things here, but I do think there's gaps, and social media can do a great job of filling them, and also, again, expanding on traditional based education. But of course, social media faces a lot of limitations and challenges. You know, there's a lot of misinformation. There's the aspect of cyberbullying and harassment that is sometimes harder to reel in when people are online. There's that easy access to pornography and you know, unrealistic expectations and misconceptions about sex. And if people don't have like digital literacy, or they didn't learn that, it's the Wild West out there on social media at times. But I, as a content creator, as specifically sex ed content creator, I do think there are ways to challenge some of those limitations. So yeah, back to like what is their understanding of sexuality? Well, I guess I kind of answered that, I guess, a little bit. Sorry, I'm like
No, this was
thinking of all the different things right now.
amazing. It was a complex question. It was actually a little bit inspired by running our social media for the Youth Sexpert program and some of the conversations that I've seen happening, especially on TikTok, that can feel very slut-shamey and very regressive. We're kind of recycling a lot of the same things that I heard when I was growing up in new and fresh ways, which can be a little bit upsetting. But also, again, as a sexual educator on Instagram, and I know a lot of us here have used social media as a place where we can provide resources. There's so much incredible work happening.
Can I chime in too? Just a couple of like really quick points.
Of course, yeah.
So one, I learned from Dr. Roger Kuhn, who's an Indigenous sexuality two-spirit person. Something that stuck with me is that the West was never wild until it was colonized. When Indigenous people were there, it wasn't wild, right? So that's one thing. And the second quick thing is that as we're talking about sexuality, especially for our audience here, I want to be reminded that we're not just talking about intercourse, right? So when we're talking about social media and sexuality and sex education, I sit in rooms with clients who've never had positive romantic role models in their lives. They say it's the Cosby Show. They talk about, I've had a client who was a teenager who dumped a crush because she saw a negative fat shaming comment he left on Lizzo's um, post somewhere, and she was like, I can't hang out with this person because they're fat shaming. So like expanding that conversation around not only sexual intercourse and also of course prevention of like STIs and where the closest clinic is and how to put a condom, external condom on, but also they're learning about body types and they're posting themselves, and in some cases to I would say Rachel's point, right? They're even creating their own sexually explicit materials and content. And so sexuality becomes very widespread on social media and does fill in a lot of different gaps for folks around looking at education. That education isn't solely about what parts go where. It's also about who am I, who likes me, am I likable, who do I like, and finding out those feeler points. And I always say that people say, oh, you don't know how to talk to people. I'm like, they talking to 100 people a day. I'm a geriatric millennial. I barely want to talk to 10 people a day. So they're talking to hundreds of people a day at a time and able to organize and get opinions and follow multiple threads. I hate Twitter. I do not understand it. And Snapchat is a little bit scary. So they're talking and doing all of this on social media. So they have these skill sets that we can only hope to catch up to.
Yeah, I think that is so insightful. That's something that I've been thinking a lot about lately in terms of reflecting on when we were building our curriculum, thinking about what the term comprehensive sex education actually means. And of course, there are national standards, but they are pretty disappointing, in my opinion. And so in going beyond that, it is kind of, it has been hard to think, where does this start and where does this end, right? When we're having conversations about like ethical non-monogamy, for example, or gosh, I'm like trying to think of other topics, but there are so many topics that go beyond just the ones that people seem to feel increasingly comfortable talking about with young folks, things like consent, boundaries, anatomy. The young people are still talking about and still deserve education around, and regardless of whether or not we think that these are relevant topics to their life now, they will be someday. So you're not only educating the child for where they are now, but also thinking through the fact that it's not like they're going to turn 18 and magically this information will just be bestowed on them, you know? So yeah, I think that was so needed to add. And so kind of in the same thought, with conversations about queerness, I was wondering, Kim, if you could speak to how parents might be best able to create an open environment for conversations about queerness, and support their children if their children embark on explorations around their own sexual orientation or gender identity.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, a lot of the stuff that the folks before me said is applicable to that as well, creating an open environment, lack of like not shaming, that sort of thing. And the thing I like to tell people is to be open to any question. Because if you ignore a question or refuse to answer, it tells a kid you won't discuss it and that they can't talk to you about everything. And sometimes, you know, if you get a question, it might take you aback, especially if it's not something you've ever considered, or it's something that you maybe grew up being taught is not okay, or it's a personal question. You want to think about what they're really asking. So when they ask you something like, have you ever had a crush on a person of the same gender? What they're really asking is that normal? And I mean, your personal experience in some cases can be helpful, but it is yours to choose whether to share. But what they're asking there is it normal to have a crush on someone of the same gender? Or how do Aunt Susie and Aunt Mary have sex? Obviously, they probably don't really want to know how your aunts are having sex. What they want to know is, can lesbians have sex? How do they do it? If no one has a penis in the relationship, how are you going to do that? So is this normal is one type of question. And then is this okay in our family is very values based. So ideally we're creating an environment in which it is okay to be queer in whatever way, be it gender or sexuality. So asking, have you ever kissed a person of the same gender? Or do you think it's okay that Mr. Anderson and Mr. Smith sleep in the same bed? What they're really asking is about your values and whether it's okay, and maybe also whether what you think is different than what their community or society thinks and why. So, I mean, just keeping an open conversation. And also, if you don't know the answer to a question, which if you are cisgender or heterosexual, you might not, that's okay. You can find the answer and get back to them. I mean, there's tons of information available online, like we already discussed. I do want to first reiterate everything that that Rachel said about pornography, really good, but also that it has unique effects on LGBTQ youth, because the depictions of non-heterosexual appearing couples tends to have special factors. So for example, depictions of two women will tend to be made for men's viewing benefit, not actually depict like what sex between two women is like. Depictions of two men might show unhealthy or abusive dynamics more frequently. And then when it comes to trans folks, there's just so much fetishizing, abuse, not really great depictions. And I mean, since queer sex isn't already talked about much, it can really add to confusion when they view porn, which is the case for any kid. But when it's something that is especially not discussed, it can amplify that. Like Rachel said, it is actors. So I like to say that it's like a movie. You wouldn't learn to drive from watching The Fast and the Furious, for example. And you would not learn about sex, be it queer or heterosexual, through porn. It is also really important to know that kids know very early what their gender and orientation is. Like, think about when you had your first crush, or when you were aware that your relatives kept buying you Barbies but trucks for your brother. So by age 4, most kids have a healthy or a stable visualization of what their gender identity is. And also the vast majority of LGBTQ folks are aware of their sexuality by the time they're a teenager. So when people say, oh, this kid can't know that they're trans or gay at this point, they can. But it's also worth noting that this stuff is fluid. People's genders and identities can change. Like the way that they feel can change. And emphasize that it's okay if they maybe identify one way and then that changes. a lot of people will say like it's a phase, and it's true that sometimes kids go through phases. I mean, I had like my I don't know, my wearing camo pants with straps on them phase. My mom is in the audience, and I'm sure she unfortunately remembers that. But some kids are experimenting with their gender and sexuality, and it does end up being a phase. It's normal to want to find out who you are. And then sometimes it's not a phase, and it is, you know, their stable, permanent identity. Either way, support them. Ask them how you can support them, and take it upon yourself to learn more. There's a lot of resources out there. In where I live in Hartford, Connecticut, we have a few local PFLAG chapters that I refer friends and family to, and there are also therapists that specialize in this. So, not quite the same as sexual health needs, but definitely very related is mental health needs. So having one supportive adult, according to the Trevor Project, can reduce a queer child's chance of suicide attempts by 40%, which is a lot. Like that's very significant. So if you are even the only supportive adult that your kid knows, I mean, it probably helps even more for it to be a parent, but that is very, very significant. And it's important, I mean, both online and in person, to prepare your kid for rude comments. And I mean, bullying happens, unfortunately, to everybody, but queer kids will get specifically targeted bullying regarding their gender and sexuality. So you want to make sure your kid is aware that that could happen and help them cope with it. You could help them come up with some comebacks. That's always satisfying when you get that comeback right away. But also helping them cope with their feelings about it, and explaining that folks that are mean to them are misinformed or afraid of difference, and that it's usually coming from a place of fear. I mean, just like when adults bully queer folks, or, you know, when we have politicians passing anti-LGBTQ laws, it's because they're scared. And again, just like therapy is good for you, it is also good for a kid who might need it. So if your kid has good mental health, they're more likely to make healthy sexual choices and have healthy relationships. So in terms of that, gender and sexuality diverse kids should learn about all kinds of safer sex. Like, I can't remember who said it, but we're not just talking about sexual intercourse. We're talking about all kinds of sex, because we need to know about safety for oral sex, anal sex. We need to know about safety for, I mean, even kissing, you know, if you have a cold, don't kiss. Stuff like that. And this can be also complicated for gender diverse kids. A lot of kids who are trans or non-binary experience dysphoria or distress related to their genitals, because they may feel that those genitals don't reflect their gender identity. And so that means it's important to be sensitive. That doesn't mean that you want to avoid talking about sex, because no matter what genitals or identity your kid has, there's a very good chance that they'll have sex someday. Most people do. In that case, it might be good to bring them to a trans specific kids therapist. Local LGBTQ organizations may have resources, because unfortunately for healthcare professionals, I'm sure many of you have experienced this. Anyone can put an LGBTQ friendly like little sticker on their Psychology Today profile or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're competent at that particular aspect of people's identities. Taking them to a gender clinic. If you do live near Connecticut, I always tell people to go to Middlesex Hospital. But that can not only help them access affirming care and education. A lot of the doctors and healthcare providers there are competent in sex ed for folks with gender diverse identities. So now I just want to recommend some reading for folks who want to learn more, because I mean, there's so much to talk about. I really like the book The Gender Creative Child by Diane Ehrensaft, and then also The Transgender Child by Rachel Pepper. There's also a book called Trans Bodies, Trans Selves, and it's kind of based on the idea of our bodies, ourselves, which is the famous women's health book made by the Boston Women's Health Collective. This book is written by trans folks for trans folks about all kinds of aspects of trans health. But it's also really useful for parents, caregivers, loved ones, etc., of trans people who want to understand. So those are my 3 recommendations on that. Yeah, does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, actually, so we have hit our time limit on the questions that we had prepared, but that was a question that came up in the Q&A. So I would love to open the floor on that one. The specific question was recommendations for queer-specific sex education resources, especially for young people who might want to do that work on their own first before talking to a parent.
So I actually just read like 10 books to prepare for this, so I could be like, this is what I recommend. So I do actually have a list that is like all cute that I made up. But I really like the book Uology. That was written by a group of physicians who I believe are from the American Academy of Pediatrics. That one's really good. Also, I recommend the book, The Parent's Guide to Explaining Sex. It's very inclusive and does a great job of including queer identities, but also balancing talking about your values with talking about facts and talking about other people's values. The Everybody book is a really good one too. And then there's one called What Makes a Baby by Corey Silverberg. He has a whole series of inclusive sex ed books. They're super cute. So those are my personal favorites.
Is it okay if I add a couple?
Yes,
sorry, Melissa.
yes, please. Yeah, I'd love to hear everyone's
That's great.
recommendations.
I was just going to say for slightly older, depending on the ages of the kids, but for slightly older, Corey Silverberg has a newer one called Sex, super inclusive, and it's kind of like graphic novel style thick. Like it's one that, you know, older tweens, I would say it's totally appropriate for tweens and teens. And there's also a website that I really like that's very like queer sex ed focused called Scarletine, that's been around forever. Creator Heather Corinna, who's a longtime sex educator. So it's really highly reputable, it's credible, but it's also not, like, as I said before, it's not dumbed down or watered down or pedantic or condescending. Like, it's really honest and frank, and you can search by topic. And so, okay, I just meant to say that. Sorry, Melissa, go for it.
Oh, no, well, actually, I'll show people the ones you were talking about. So, sex, this is what it looks like. And just like you said, it is thick, but in a good way. Corey Silverberg, Fiona Smith, and then this is the other one, Sex is a Funny Word. So this would be great for tweens and young teens. And then this would be great for teens and young adults. And then speaking of Heather Corinna, this is a really great book that she wrote, Wait, What? This is a comic book guide to relationships, bodies, and growing up. So really, really good, inclusive, wonderful resource.
That is awesome.
I can add 2 more. So I have Sonia Renee Teller's Celebrate Your Body, right? And its changes too. And then I also have the Celebrate Your Body too. And I got these from my local like neighborhood swap. So they had the books as well. So these are great for teens. And then for a website, there's Sex Etc. It is actually teens talking to teens about their experiences, and it's monitored, but it's peer sex educators talking to others. And then also I get to sit on the board with Heather Corinna for Our Bodies Ourselves, which is finding open resources for folks based on various types of topics that we actually, a team of sexuality professionals, review and go over. And so it's another searchable place to find answers that are fact-based and informational.
Awesome.
Let's not forget about one of the sponsors, right? So amaze.org has really awesome, short, fun, animated videos, totally free on YouTube. They're made for tweens and teens on the array of sexual health and sex ed topics. And then they also have amaze.org/junior. So if you have younger children or as parents, there are short videos that you can share with a younger child and videos specifically for parents to help you understand how to have these conversations. Also, everybodycurious.com has really fun videos that are sex ed that you can watch with tweens and teens. Yeah, so many resources these days that young
So
people
many
have,
resources.
right?
No, it's incredible. And we will be sending out an email with both the recording and a list of these resources. Hopefully we can hyperlink as many as possible to make them as accessible as possible. Yeah, I love that people are answering the resource related questions in the chat. I think for the next question, it could be cool to address this one from Katie. This says, how can we amplify fact-based sex education on social media?
I think if you follow everyone here, that is a good place to start. I also think it's really something that draws me to educators online are folks, really educators of color, and also people who, you know, provide sources and use credible organizations or websites, I guess, or like refer to those things so that I can go look. And, you know, if I'm interested in further resources or research, it's helpful to have that in there. And I also love when people aren't the only, like they have other voices included on their channel or whatever it is. And they partner with other educators and professionals. I think that that's cool. But yeah, everyone here, start there.
I
And
love
make
that.
sure that you share when you find a good page, share it because the algorithm does us dirty, y'all. The algorithm does us so dirty, and it's gotten worse over the years. And so, you know, we can be putting out really important, great, not worth suppressing content that is life-giving, and it's not getting out to the actual followers that want to see the content because it is suppressed on the algorithm. It's intentionally being censored. I don't know about y'all, but you know, the experience of having your account being threatened, you know, for closure, right? I'm sure we've all experienced it at some point on the way, and it's like that is just a very real thing that's going on. And so we can't rely on just the algorithm to get the content out there. It's when folks are commenting, when they're sharing, when they're saving posts, when you're playing that game to help ensure that the content, you're letting the platform know that this is valuable. It is not unsafe. And that it deserves to be spread out there. So it takes all of us as a community. So when you see something good, share it and shout it out. Make sure other people know about it and follow it.
Yeah, I think this conversation is also really timely right after our conversation about books and other resources, because people's accounts can be incredible resources, especially to share with young people who are probably already online. I'm Gen Z, and my reading time versus my TikTok time might be a little bit heavier on the TikTok side. So yeah, I think that when you do find great accounts, thinking through, you know, how much you feel that you can trust that person, and then being able to share that with the young people in your life.
Is it okay if I add one thing? Just from sort of like the parenting and caregiving perspective, I also think that we have some work to do with our kids and helping them develop the like critical thinking skills and the sort of like you know, the ability to sift through the not so credible sources in order to find what is really, you know, credible and valuable and reputable. Because I think that I'm sure you all have encountered this with students and with kids, just like the amount of misinformation that's making its way to young people, and like the number of questions I get about things at all ages, really. And that's what's kind of remarkable about it. So like a fourth and fifth grader, of course, because you're fresh and green and new to the world, and you're just kind of exploring some of your first websites. But by middle and high school, you would think maybe there would be, and there is, of course, there's more discretion and discernment, but there's still a lot of misinformation that it's hard, you know, to kind of to know. So it takes, I think, some work in the village to help our kids develop those skills.
And just to add to that, something I think that harkens back to what Melissa said earlier around like talking about age appropriateness. You have to remember that, especially for folks of color, Black folks, Brown folks, puberty happens a bit earlier. So it's not unheard of for puberty to start to happen around 8 and 9. So breastbudding, pubic hair, erections, wet dreams, menstruation to happen that early. And people tend to forget that, yes, the body is changing and they're trying to grow into all of these new parts, but the brain is changing too. So the attitudes, the sadness, the wondering if I'm different, but they also have the same feelings of hormonal arousal. And that can be hard to wrap your mind around, right? Like this 9-year-old has what? Huh? It's so uncomfortable. Absolutely. But they're looking for those answers. And if you have been the person that has been lying to them and telling them that their penis is going to fall off the first time they masturbate, and then they masturbate and they're waiting for their penis to fall off and it don't fall off, I'm gonna come look at you kind of side eye and be like, I don't know. I don't know if Rachel been telling me the truth the whole time. What else has Rachel been not telling me the truth about? And so now you've started to disintegrate some of that trust. So they can't come to you and be like, I don't know if you're going to lie to me or not. But this person on TikTok said this, this, this. And if I do this, 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 it'll make it grow. Right. So we want to make sure that we're not only giving them the skills, but we're giving them as much information that we can think that they can handle and digest. But remembering that these things are happening earlier than typically what we think is going to happen. And we've all probably been in that situation. I've had somebody thought they were dying because they got their period. And they thought they were dying because they couldn't stop the blood. And that's a traumatic first onset where she told me to call her mom and tell her mom that she loved her because she couldn't stop the bleeding and she was going to die from menstruation because nobody had told her because they thought they could wait longer. So the time can be now.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, we have answered all the Q&A questions, so I might just grab one last question to open up to everyone to sort of close us out. But I'm wondering, I think people have touched on this a little bit, but are there questions or topics that you each in your areas of work see young people asking about that older generations might not be aware of? The example I included here was I was thinking through conversations that we've had with our students around breath play, which is an area of kink that has really made its way to the mainstream and that young people are increasingly exposed to. And there are healthier ways to practice it in terms of safety and obviously less safe ways to practice it. So are there things that similarly you receive questions about or see conversations about that might be good to consider here that maybe weren't being considered?
I definitely think sexting. I mean, that's been around since, I mean, I guess people probably wrote each other sexy letters like a long time ago, but you know, you couldn't just take a picture with your cell phone and text it to somebody until, I don't know, 2000 or something. So, and it's become easier and easier because cell phones have become more and more computers. So that's something that older folks might have difficulty talking to younger folks about, just because of knowledge, but also because even for millennials, the sexting like experiences that they've had are nothing like how sexting is now because of how fast technology has progressed. And I mean, that relates to anything technology related. Like, even if you were on Facebook in 2007, that doesn't mean you know anything about whatever the youths are doing these days, you know? So it can be difficult.
Yeah, I think that's super relevant too with revenge porn. I remember that even being an issue when I was in high school, and I can only imagine that's been, gosh, worsened. Which is
I actually have a great resource for that. Leah Juliet, they did a lot of like national advocacy and stuff, and they also work in an organization that works with Mind Equality Connecticut. And they have so much to say about it. Definitely follow Leah Juliet if you want more on that.
awesome. And then I'll open up to Mariah, I think had her hand raised first.
Yeah, just quickly, can you hear me, by the way? I changed okay, cool. I think a lot of youth just want to know how things work, not just how to prevent harm, which is what I think a lot of sex ed focuses on, is how to prevent this and that. They often want explicit knowledge on how to have sex, or how to break up with someone when they really like them, or how to give their partner pleasure. There's a lot of like, how do you do something, not why you shouldn't, or, you know, the why behind things. So I'm seeing a lot of that, especially in like comments or just in anonymous questions and things like that.
Yeah, I see a lot of that in your content too. And also in the questions that we get. So that definitely resonates. Yeah, Melissa.
Yeah, and actually that ties into what I was going to share as well, in that our young people now are navigating so much more pressure around having to be always on, always available, always accessible because of these devices, and the dilemmas that they face in trying to maintain friendships, trying to maintain, you know, romantic or sexual, you know, or pressures of sexualized relationships. And so having the conversations with them about the dilemmas that they're facing. And even if our situations generationally may have been different, and we maybe didn't have such easy access through devices, there are threads of so much of what they're experiencing and is at the core of what they're trying to problem solve and figure out that is relatable, you know. And again, it's about being that listening ear. We may not always have the answers right away. We may not always be able to fix, you know, it's not always about us having to fix it or take it away or make the pain, you know, go away, or the challenge go away, but being present, being available for their dilemmas and to land and to help them problem solve. And I wanted to just share a few resources that are parent specific that can help you with that on this. So this one behind their screens, these are all very new within the last couple of years. What teens are facing and adults are missing. This one is a really, really great read for parents and caregivers. It'll help give you insight into what the generation of young people right now are facing. Also, Yes, Your Kid, and this one is great, talking about sexting, communication, porn. I love this one, especially because it has so many scripts. So if you're one of those people that was like, but what do I say? You know, and it takes you through the array of sexual health topics. So these are really good. And then also, if they've got that first phone coming their way, or you're thinking about it, or you're trying to negotiate with them about whether they should get that first phone, a book like this, First Phone, can be part of the process, you know, of helping them prepare for that device and the responsibilities that are around it. So something y'all can read together, or that you can have them read portions. This one's made for tweens, so for the young person to read and work through. And love this one, How to Talk to Your Kids About Porn, right? This one's so good. Again, all of these are just within the last few years, so they're very relevant to what's going on right now with our young people and in this digital world.
That's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much.
So really quickly, I will just add the last little piece. Something we haven't touched on is that intimate partner violence is actually up among teens. So teens are experiencing relational hardships and obstacles right now. And also there's a level of queering of relationships. So people are starting to revalue and not solely value romantic relationships over platonic relationships amongst teens. Also, they're starting to explore consensual non-monogamy in ways. I can tell you my 5-year-old is very proud that she has a boyfriend and a girlfriend and that they know about each other. And that means for them that they eat lunch together and they're nice to each other on the playground, which is completely developmentally appropriate for a 5-year-old. But my 5-year-old right now is polyamorous. And I'm like, go for it, kid. But we see this in teens, and teens are like, can I do this? Is this okay? I really, really care about more than one person. And how do I negotiate this? But we're also seeing a sensitivity to rejection. And so people are taking it as if I am rejected, it is my entire personhood that is horrible. And so we have to start teaching our children that rejection is normal. It doesn't feel good for anybody. And a rejection is another person's way of taking care of themselves. It means that they cannot meet your needs, they cannot meet your desires. They are aware of that and they're taking care of themselves. We don't know, and they might not know what they want or need. So it's important that, yeah, rejection can hurt, but it does not devalue you as a human. And so that is the hard part that I'm seeing my teens struggle with, of feeling unwanted, of feeling not liked. And what do they need to do? And how do they need to contort in order to be wanted and in order to be liked in a relationship realm?
Yeah,
I-
amazing. Yeah, sorry. I was just
Sorry,
gonna say,
Tara.
Rachel, if you wanted to share.
No, you first, please.
No, I was just gonna yeah, open the floor to you.
Well, I absolutely love what you just said, Dr. Lex, and I could not agree more. And I think it's a piece of the consent conversation that's really missing. So we talk a lot about like strong, assertive communication and boundary setting and respecting someone else's boundary setting, but we don't talk a lot about how to manage and handle rejection and normalize rejection as just like, it's just part of relational dynamics between people. It's gonna happen. It's a given that it's gonna happen. And why is there this like fragility built in right now, right? And it's notable. You're right. It's really notable. And I don't know what's happening that's making that. So I don't think it's new, but I think it's more pronounced. And it's really like there's some serious work to be done in helping our kids learn how to handle rejection. Just like you said it perfectly. I can't say it any better. So I just want to just add on and say I couldn't agree more. Beautiful. And can I say one more thing about Melissa? What you said, Melissa, about like this creating this listening space and what I find just personally as a parent of 2 teenagers right now, how incredibly humbling it is to be in this phase of life as a parent where my kids are saying out loud with words and actions, go away. But I know on some level, they're also asking me to come closer. So at this very moment where they're sort of like developmentally hardwired to pull away and individuate and separate and sort of define themselves in opposition to us as parents, they also really, really still need us, but in different ways. And that emphasis on listening over talking or advice giving or fixing is so powerful. And I wish I'd had somebody say it to me sooner, because I'm learning by making mistakes and I'm learning in real time. We all are. But yeah, that's beautiful. So thank you for reminding all of us how important that is.
Thank you for echoing that. And yeah, so but my oldest is 25, so I've been through all the stages, and then I have 14-year-old, so we are in it. And so, like you said, we're always learning from them. We may find ourselves making mistakes, and every one of our children are unique. They can't just all be the same. Once we feel like we got some skills down, can we just copy paste? Nope. The next ones need something else. So yeah, just always being open to learning in the journey. And what I was going to add to the great discussion between Lex and Rachel there, the question mark around what the fragility on rejection and why do we think, what comes up for me goes back to just our young people are in this highly digital world where everything is content, right? And so they are getting content after content of public rejections, public humiliation, because it creates content. It makes people click and watch, it makes people laugh or whatever, right? And even in the most brutal ways we've seen, right? And so it's like we can imagine what is that like to be a young person going through things developmentally that we all did and then that they will, right? Just those kind of baseline things. But then to have this very public, and when we were growing up, maybe it was like America's Funniest Home Video, and that was like very curated and like it had to go through all these things to be worthy enough to the VHS and all the things, you know, now you could be sleeping on the bus, drooling, being a human, and someone can be recording that and putting it out there, right? So um, that's what I think about, you know, is those nuances of this generation and the things that they have to grapple with that are very real and very valid fears about um, their privacy, their protection, their personhood, and whether it will be respected or disrespected at any given time. And yeah, so just so much empathy, so much compassion. And again, going back to just that listening, there's so much that they're experiencing that if we close ourselves off, if we don't make the home a safe space for them to share their experiences or to feel the fullest scope of their feelings on any given day, without jumping to judgment or reaction, how we could be closing that door, you know, to learn and understand what is going on in their world. And just like Kim said, how can I support you?
I
Yeah,
also liked what you said about how each of your kids has had different needs. It's not about giving every kid the exact same thing. Oh my gosh, my blinds are making my face look so weird. It's not about every kid needing the exact same thing. It's about giving each kid what it is that they need.
absolutely. And I think the conversation about rejection really made me reflect on how I learned to cope with rejection and how that had to be a self-taught thing. I so wish somebody had just said to me, rejection is, you know, like Dr. Lex was saying, that person taking care of themselves, taking care of their needs. And I think a lot of the way that I learned to cope with it was really just fundamentally stripping down, like, why am I so upset? Why am I so hurt? It's because a lot of the time I was assuming the why behind why I was getting rejected or experiencing rejection. And I let that sort of bounce off all of the insecurities that I already had. And so I can totally imagine that being something worse again with social media, where it's like so many of our insecurities are already just exacerbated by being online, whether it's expectations around beauty standards or expectations around masculinity or femininity and not feeling like you meet them in whatever way. And so I think rejection can be like a real life sort of reminder of that when you're not thinking about it from the other person's perspective, or when you're assuming the why, really, because there are a million reasons you could get rejected for a million different things that have absolutely nothing to do with your value or anything like that. Cool. Unless anybody else has any other comments, I absolutely, from the bottom of my heart, want to thank all of the panelists, all of the event partners, all of the attendees. This has been incredible. I'm so excited for the future of events like this. All of this will be accessible in your email. And again, we will try to hyperlink to different resources that have been shared today. But yes, thank you all so much. We covered so much ground. It's insane. So I couldn't be happier and more thankful.
Thank you.
Awesome. I'm gonna stop recording and I'm gonna close out the meeting. But yes, please feel free to shoot me an email. And have a great rest of your evening.
Thank
Bye,
you all so much.
Bye.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Good night.